Apps like Calorie AI are making tens of millions of dollars a year. And here's the crazy part. They're barely more than a single API call to OpenAI. In this video, we're building a full Cal AI clone from scratch. No coding required. We'll prompt Lovable to build the front end and use n8n to automate the back end. By the end, we'll have a working app where you can upload a photo of your meal and it instantly returns calorie and nutrition info powered entirely by AI. As you watch, let your imagination run wild, because the next Calorie AI, it's probably hiding in plain sight. And after this, you'll know how to build it. So let's jump in. All right, and here we go. Calorie AI is making over $20 million a year. We got to get y'all some of that. So let's demo Meal Snap, the very basic Cal AI clone in terms of functionality that we built in just really a few hours using Lovable and n8n. So here's the backend that's powering the app. We're going to do a quick demo here, and then we're going to break this down more node by node and the full implementation in the next section of this video. But you can see here what's going to happen here in n8n is we're going to receive an image of a meal. We're going to pass that off to OpenAI's Vision API. We're going to extract results and run a prompt over those results to report back in the app of the calorie breakdown of the meal. So now we're in Lovable. You can see we prompted a very basic mobile application, and we're going to upload your meal. So I took this picture yesterday at a cafe of this very basic chicken sandwich with fries that I had. And then we just get the macros that's firing off to n8n. And it's going to come back here. Boom. Grilled chicken sandwich with fries and side salad. So obviously it's slightly got the side salad wrong, as that's part of the sandwich, but in the picture it does look like a salad. Analysis complete, 88% confidence, 45 grams protein, 60 grams carbs, 35 grams fats. Health score 5 out of 10. Okay, let's do one more. Upload a meal. Let's do this little salmon bowl with some kale and potatoes, it looks like. Get the macros. Analyzing meal. Boom. Grilled salmon with roasted potatoes and kale salad. Analysis complete, 90% confidence. Protein, carbs, fats, health score. And we might want to work on the health score because I think that one was much better than the one before. But you get the idea. With additional fine tuning, you can make this app have all sorts of bells and whistles. That is the demo. So I'm going to pass it off to Lucas to break down exactly how we built this. All right, quick before we pass it off to Lucas, if you guys want this full n8n template for free to download and use yourself, you should join our AI Automation Mastery School community, which is linked in the description below. We break down a whole bunch of different automations in this community and all the materials for free. All you're going to do is navigate to the video for the n8n template that you want, and then you can download the relevant JSON files that you can pull into your n8n. All right, so join the community, completely free, and let's jump back in.
So before I walk you through the full process of building everything you see here and in that demo you just watched, I want to briefly pause and walk you through something even more simple inside of Lovable so we can get an end-to-end system working that's making a basic request from Lovable to n8n as our backend. The goal of this is really to simplify this process as much as possible so you can see how to connect these two systems together with data flowing between them. That way, you don't have to deal with all the debugging nonsense that comes up with building out and changing the styles of a Lovable app like this. We'll get that simple request working and then layer on more and more complexity as we go along. So here we are inside of Lovable with a blank canvas in front of us. What I'm envisioning that we build here for this simplified version of the Cal AI clone is going to be just 3 components. It's going to have a text input that lets us plug in the URL to our n8n backend. It's going to have a file upload component that lets us upload our meal that we want to get analyzed. And finally, it's going to have a button that lets us submit that request and see the results that come back from that analysis. So let's get started prompting and see if we can build out this full simplified web app. I'm going to switch over to ChatGPT and dictate my prompt instead of typing it out. Please build me a simple web app that contains 3 components. Number 1, a text input that allows me to enter a URL. Number 2, a file upload component that lets me upload an image of a meal. And number 3, a button that will submit an HTTP request to the URL that was provided in the text input from before. Once that response is received from the HTTP request, I want you to print out JSON of the full details of the successful response. If there's any validation errors or any errors that come up during this process, please display that in an info box above. So we'll check this off, get that transcription back instead of having to type all of this out, and let's paste into Lovable here and see what it's able to make. So we can see here, looks like the instructions were followed and understood. I'll create a simple web app for you with a URL input, image upload, and HTTP request functionality. This will be a clean, modern interface with proper handling and a response display. So looks pretty simple here, honestly more than we even asked for, and so we'll see what the final output is going to look like. I'll pause here and come back once this finishes. All right, so we're back now in Lovable with the result of that very first prompt. Visually, everything looks pretty good, but let's go through step by step to see if everything is exactly as we need. First item here is going to be our text input, which matches what we're expecting, and it looks like this is going to wire up to that API request. Item number 2 is this file selector. So if I click it and select a file, it does appear like it's going to let me load this in as expected also. Finally, we got this button here, and if I click it without a URL being set, it does look like it's going to give us this validation error message. And then if I click again, it does validate that. Let's see if we can do a real URL. So if we click that, we get this error message, and hopefully this is wired up to a real fetch request. If not, we can come back and fix this later, but at a glance, for this first step of the Lovable web app, everything is matching what I would expect. Let's switch forward here and jump over to n8n to actually build out the web API endpoint that's going to be our backend for this full system. Now that we're back here inside of n8n, let's go through this workflow node by node so you guys can see how to take a system like this and connect it up to a Lovable API request. The first thing that we have set up here is going to be the entry point to this workflow, and it's very important that we set this up as our incoming webhook. Up top, we have our webhook URLs, one for our test environment, one for our production environment, and then a couple different settings down below. We're going to want to make sure that this HTTP method is set to post because we are going to be posting and sending data through this webhook API call. Next part is path. This is okay to leave as a default for now. If you're building a large production system, I do think you'd want to change this, but for this demonstration case, we don't need to change anything. Same thing with authentication here. If we were deploying this application to production and going to have real users on it, we don't want to leave this as none because that means anybody who has access to our production URL here would be able to use that. In the case of a system using an OpenAI Vision API request and another LLM call that follows it, this could get very expensive if somebody started spamming this endpoint with a bunch of requests. So if you're actually opening this up in a real production system, do make sure you have some form of authentication set up, like a header token or a password on this endpoint that you can save as a credential and only let certain clients have access to that. Finally, and probably the most important part here, will be this respond note. In order for this to work and for us to send data back to Lovable and Lovable's web app, we do need to make sure that we're selecting use respond to webhook node. If we don't and leave it as the default immediately here, this is going to mean that whenever this workflow runs, we're going to trigger this first node, and then it's going to exit out early with just some basic response data that n8n provides. What we need to do for this system is run our prompts over the course of the data received and build a custom response with that analysis of the meal that was uploaded. And so in order to do that, we have to do the using respond to webhook node, and at the very end here, we have to add that respond to webhook node. So let me show you guys here from the side what that looks like. So if I search webhook, we have webhook as the trigger node, and then respond to webhook at the very end here to build out our custom response. So extremely important, your backend n8n system will not work if you don't configure it this way. Let's move forward to the rest of the nodes here. When we receive this image request and the request to analyze a meal from our Cal AI clone, we do need to go through a couple steps to extract that information, such as the calories, other nutritional info, and a health score from it. We're going to be leveraging the OpenAI Vision API in order to do this. So let me pull up a previous request so you guys can see a little bit more what this is going to look like end to end with real data. And so we have our request coming in that has an image attached to it. So we have our light lunch here at McDonald's, looks pretty typical. That's going to get passed through into this analyze image node. What we're going to do is use the image resource on the OpenAI node. We're going to use the analyze image operation, and I like to use the 4.0 latest version of the model to get the best results back. After that's done, we build out this big prompt here where we set up the role of the AI being an expert AI nutrition analyst. We're giving it a mission to perform a detailed nutritional analysis and provide a protocol for this prompt to go through and extract the key details and define the response format we want to see this data coming back in. And so we're having it come back with a name, the number of calories, the grams of protein, other macronutrients, and give us 2 scores at the very bottom here. Where confidence score is a number that tells us how confident the AI is in its own analysis, as well as a health score that goes from 0 to 10 that gives us almost like a progress bar that will display on the final web app so we can see how overly nutritional or unhealthy this meal is that we're analyzing. In order to get the image analyzed, we're going to use this binary file input type since we have that file passed into the trigger of this web API. And we're just going to use the name here for image and make sure that matches to the given image. So here's the result that you're seeing here is from a previous run. And so we have this content here of everything that was extracted. So we got this McDonald's combo with 4 cheeseburgers, 3 fries, and 20 chicken nuggets. So pretty good here for that first analysis. One thing to note here, this is just a text field that we're getting back. And so before we return any of this data, we do run a second prompt here where we're going to extract those results into a more structured format. And so I have an LLM node set up here. So let me copy this to the editor so we can see the node menu. So LLM call, basic LLM chain actually is the name of that. And what that is going to do is allows us to take text input that we're specifying here, build up our task that we wanted to extract that text content into a structured JSON result, and we're going to dynamically pass in that image analysis that we just received from before. So we're going from image on the API trigger to its analysis, which returns text content, and then we're going to take that text content, structure it as a JSON object, and we're going to pass that off to the very end here where we return it. The other thing I want to call out here is the structured output parser and the auto-fixing output parser. I added these 2 in just to make the whole system more reliable, especially this auto-fixing output parser node. What this does is if there's any sort of issue on the prompt that runs here and it can't format the given text into our desired output that is defined here, what it's going to do is run a prompt on that again, and see if it's able to format it a little bit differently. So say there's a missing comma or a missing quotation mark. What it's going to do is it's going to fix that up, and so that any errors that happen after the first attempt can get corrected, and we can get a successful result back. Finally, taking this forward, let me go back to a previous execution. What we're going to do is going to take the result of extracting the JSON results from this LLM chain call and simply output this as a JSON string. And so our output object here has that meal name, the calories, all of the macronutrients, and those 2 scores that we talked about from before. So that covers it here for what we're building on this API endpoint backend system in n8n, where we're taking that image data, analyzing it, and returning a nice JSON object as a result, just like a real-world API if you were writing code. So now that we have this n8n workflow configured to be an API endpoint and be the backend of our system, let's go forward with the next step to connect this backend system to the Lovable app we just prompted for. In order to do this, all I got to do is jump in here, grab our production URL of the initial webhook trigger, copy that, and then make sure that we have this workflow turned on. I'm going to jump back to this Lovable app we just built, paste in that URL, grab our image again, and then go ahead and submit this request. So if everything's working as we think it is, what's happening right now is this Lovable app is making an HTTP request over to our n8n endpoint. And if we look at our endpoints here, if we look at our executions here, we should see this new one that just came in. So it's successful. That looks good. Let's go ahead and step through the steps and see what we got back. So here's the request that came in. We got our image that was posted, which looks good. That's the same image we uploaded. we have a call to the OpenAI Image API where we passed in our image, got that result back, which also looks good. We extracted our results into structured output. And finally, we return that result as JSON in this final step. So if we look at Lovable, we can see request completed successfully. And under the API response details, we have this body field here that contains all of the details that match one-to-one with our n8n workflow. So this means with a simple prompt, we were able to get data passed back and forth from our Lovable app to n8n back to Lovable. So this is perfect. So now let's jump back into this other Lovable project and let me walk you through my thought process and how I was able to build this Cal AI clone that connects to that exact same n8n web API endpoint we just put together. And so the first thing I did here was actually start pretty simple. And so this is the top of my prompting chain. I said, build me a simple web app that lets me upload a picture of a meal that I just ate. After the image gets uploaded, the system should make an HTTP request with details of the image and wait for a response. After the response is received, you should display data about the nutritional info of the meal. So that gets started, starts turning through, and let me show you what was built right after that. So if you click Restore in Lovable, you're going to be able to pull up the result of a previous prompt and what it came back with. So let's let this load here. So we just finished this restore, and here's what came back. Pretty dead simple. Honestly, kind of looks like what we built before. So let me show you how I took this forward and some of the important future prompts. So I created this beautiful nutritional app analyzer, yada, 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 continued forward with those steps. And so the next thing I did was actually provided this image of the Cal AI UI that was in its app store listing. So I said, can you use this style to be formatted to look like the mobile app and use the styles that match this app in the provided screenshot? So it analyzed that and analyzed that screenshot, took into account for my prompt, and went forward with another version of the app. So if I restore this, we can look and see how the app appeared after that step. Back here with that result. So a little bit of a change. It kind of looks like it added this mobile container around it and added a couple buttons that mimicked a real mobile UI, but not quite beautiful, not quite what we want. So let's continue further into the prompting session. I then asked it, can you wrap this in an iPhone mockup container so it can look better in a demo? Let's get that loaded. Just load it up, and we're continuing to get closer and closer to the final end state we're going for. We still have some weird buttons here. There's still a little bit of weird spacing up top, so not quite happy with it yet. And so the next thing I want to call it here is a pretty cool feature of Lovable that does let you make specific edits. And so if you see this reference div here, you can actually take this target sign, drag it on to a spot of the app that was just built, and you can restrict the edits that are going to happen to just a very small piece of UI. And so if you find yourself getting into a spot while you're prompting and making edits where it undoes something that you want it to stay, or this changes were too sweeping, what you can do is use that target sign, point somewhere on the target app, and it's going to restrict those changes to just that. So super useful while you're going through these iterations in Lovable to change the styles to how you want it to be. Let's proceed to the next one. Going down here, we can see the next prompt that I provided is actually pretty vague and open-ended. I literally just said, can you make this look prettier for a demo? Very open-ended, not a ton of stylistic questions, but let's see what that was able to come back with. All right, now we're getting somewhere. We got the nice background that pops out the mock-up of the iPhone, and we have some stylistic changes made to our full components here. Still a little bit of weird spacing we're able to adjust with some of those targeted edits that we're talking about before. But we still see this functional components all working together. So this is looking good, and let's proceed forward. So going down the prompts that I covered, some style changes, some more white space changes to make the formatting look better. And let's get here into the part where we're able to actually wire up this Lovable app to that n8n endpoint that was just built out. And so here's the prompt that I used to do that. Update the code to make an actual API post request to this endpoint URL. And so then I pasted in that same n8n endpoint we used for this demo. I put it here into the prompt. And then I also added an additional part of this prompt that says, please also increase the timeout and wait at least 30 seconds before timing out with an error. So what that's going to do is, and the reason why I added that is it's going to give us at least 30 seconds for the spinner to go before it adds in any sort of error. because this workflow is doing some relatively expensive prompts, like analyzing an image, uploading that file, and then another prompt to extract it, we don't want this to time out an error for our users or while we're testing this out. So stuff like that can be a pretty important consideration when you're really building out a production scale app, but just wanted to throw that out there. Finally, let's go down and view some of the other prompts. So we can see there's some more cleanup stuff like removing the header, making some different stylistic changes. And the next thing we come here is a pretty interesting one. So we can see before, after I added this prompt to make a real request to this endpoint, I noticed that the app wasn't actually working as I expected it to. You know, if you recall from before, I mentioned sometimes if you ask Lovable to make an API request, and there's not a real endpoint provided, it's going to mock out that data and give you fake stubbed out data so it can still display something back, even if it isn't making a real API call. And so I noticed at this point, even though I uploaded an image of like an omelet or of pancakes or something else, it was giving me back the same result each time. I also noticed while looking inside of n8n that the execution was running and still giving me back the correct data. And so that let me know that n8n was working correctly and our backend workflow was still working correctly, but it was actually on the Lovable side where something was going wrong. So that gave me a hunch to check in further to the mocked data, and that's why I came here and asked it to use the real data given back to us from that n8n endpoint. And so it did do that. I had to specify to use the health score because I was getting an error from before. And so there will be little things that come up with this that you'll have to chat back and forth or use this chat feature here within Lovable to figure out how to fix it. Your session of building this out may look very different from the session that I went through. And so these are just some problems to be aware of. A lot of times, if you ask something that's wrong or tell something that's wrong in the specific point of the application, the AI is going to be able to come back and offer a suggestion or lead you down a trail to actually fix that and to improve it. So that's the one thing I want to build and impart on you guys while you're trying to go through and connect to your own no-code apps, Lovable apps, to an n8n backend. There will be little things that come up like this. Scrolling through, similar thing with the confidence score. I noticed that regardless of what food I uploaded, the confidence score always remained the same. So there we go. That basically covers the full process of how we built this end to end and got this Cal AI clone working to scan a real image uploaded into a Lovable app, pass that off to the n8n workflow we just built out, and give us back some real analysis data at the very end. Now, the final thing that I want to touch on here is back inside n8n, and that's going to be in regard to how you can extend this workflow and truly build out a real production-ready application and add more functionality to any Lovable app you're trying to build. The demo that we went through really just had one feature, and that took an image, analyzed it, and returned the results. But say we wanted to extend this further. Say we wanted to actually save those results after they got scanned for the first time, and then the next time the user logged back in, we wanted to list a history of each of the meals scanned from previous analysis. Right now, that wouldn't be possible. We just scan that one at a time, and then we lose that history after we go to scan another. And so in order to extend our system, we start needing to add different endpoints into our workflow to be able to add more and more functionality. If I were doing this in a real system, I would follow a very similar pattern to what we just followed, where we add in a new webhook here as our trigger. And so if we go here, add a webhook trigger, we're going to get a different URL that's spun out from the one before. So if we look at production, we have this FB1795 to start in our path. Then if we look at this path here under production URL, we have 69F232. So a completely different URL under our same workflow in n8n is spun out. And so for different functionality we're trying to build in our Lovable app, we can have different handling here. So say this was the endpoint we wanted to save meal scan results in. This could do something like hooking up to a database like Supabase, and we could create a row in our system where the result of that previous scan gets saved in, and then we finally will respond with our webhook here. So we have our webhook, we write our row to the database, and then we respond with that data. And the important thing is we do need to change this to using respond to webhook node for this to work. So we'll set that up very similarly to before. And this is kind of the stubbed out process for saving data to a database. Of course, you'd still need to hook this up, but that's the gist of it. And then if we wanted to go further, we could clone this again and build out another trigger that is going to be responsible for retrieving rows from the database. And so this could be something where we need to list the results, and under Supabase, we could use getMany and then build out a query here for loading up all of the past meals for the user by some user ID or by food ID or any type of filtering you need to do. You can load it from the database, build out those results, and still respond with that. And so that's kind of how you can structure together and compose a real, more complex system by using n8n as your backend. Really, this is just the starting point, and depending on whatever you're trying to build, whether it's a clone of something, some internal tool, or ultimately a public-facing application, the sky's kind of the limit here on what you can put together.
All right, before you go, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Seriously, do it, because we're gonna be breaking down all of the AI automations that we use to run all of our businesses. They're super helpful, and we're gonna break down exactly how we do them on this YouTube channel. So make sure like and then subscribe, and then you'll get notified when we publish new workflows that can make your businesses run 20 times more efficiently, just like we're seeing here at the recap and the other businesses that we're running. The other item is join our school community for free. The link's in the description. You'll be able to get this template, this automation that we just ran through in this video, completely for free. You can go to school and navigate to the video that you want, and then you can download the JSON output for the n8n automation. With that, you can upload it into your n8n, clone it, and then tune it for your business and your use cases. So like and subscribe, join our free community to get this automation for yourself, and we'll see you in the next video.